What if I told you that Scorpion's most terrifying ability, his Hellfire, comes from sheer emotional pain turned into literal flame? This isn't just a flashy power-up in Mortal Kombat. Scorpion is Hanzo Hasashi, leader of the Shirai Ryu clan, whose entire life was rewritten by tragedy and the dark influence of the Nether Realm. In this video, we'll break down exactly where his powers come from in the lore, how Quan Chi's intervention in Nether Realm energy made them possible, and then test which parts could ever be explained, or even simulated, by biology or technology in real life. But before we get to fire and teleportation, we need to show you one man's loss could turn his existence into a weapon. Hanzo Hasashi's life did not begin in fire, but in balance. As Grand Master of the Shirai Ryu, he lived with the paradox of being both a weapon and a father. On one side, his clan demanded the efficiency of a predator. Hanzo's blades could sever a throat before his enemy's pulse even registered danger. On the other side, his home pulsed with a different rhythm, the laughter of his young son, the calm of evenings with his wife. He lived between two worlds, and for years, he carried both. But the fragile balance shattered in an instant. The Shirai Ryu were annihilated, his family butchered, his life ended. The rival Lin Kuei or Quan Chi's machinations. But in every telling, the result is the same. Hanzo dies with everything stripped from him. His end is not a peaceful one. He is slaughtered, his final sights marked by flames consuming his home, the screams of his family mixing with the clash of steel. Here's where the science creeps in. When the human body experiences trauma on that scale, the nervous system floods with catecholamines, adrenaline or noradrenaline, spiking up tenfold normal levels. Heart rate can soar past 180 beats per minute, oxygen demand skyrockets, and muscles burn glycogen as though sprinting for survival. But in Hanzo's case, there was no survival. That biological storm in lore doesn't dissipate. It becomes a tether. In the Nether Realm, that chemical spike, that fight-or-flight overload, is twisted into something else, a permanent circuit for vengeance. Quan Chi plays the surgeon of souls. His resurrection doesn't just bring Hanzo back, it rewires him. Imagine taking a nervous system meant to run at a steady 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit and cranking it until emotional pain itself combusts into literal hellfire. If you translated grief into energy, the numbers become staggering. 1 pound of coal releases about 6,000 BTUs when burned. Theoretically, if every cell of grief in Scorpion's body carried that kind of fuel density, his flames could unleash the heat of a small furnace every time he lashed out. That's why in canon, Hellfire isn't oxygen dependent. It's grief turned into plasma, burning hotter than natural flame because it isn't bound by chemistry. But what makes Scorpion terrifying is that this isn't just sorcery layered onto a corpse. The fire is bound to his memory. Quan Chi deceives him into blaming Sub-Zero for his family's deaths, fusing his grief with a false target. Every flame, every strike, every teleport is not just an attack. It's a reliving of loss, reignited again and again. He doesn't just channel rage. He's forced to reopen his wound every time he fights. That cycle makes his vengeance infinite. In physics terms, it's as if his soul has become a reactor. A nuclear reactor converts about 0.1% of its fuel's mass into usable energy. Scorpion's grief, if measured the same way, would be a self-sustaining chain reaction. No end, no cooldown, no healing. Death can't stop him because the Nether Realm has converted pain into power. A revenant doesn't breathe, doesn't bleed out, doesn't fatigue like flesh. He rises endlessly, tethered to the cycle of suffering engineered into him. This is why Scorpion is more than just another fighter in Mortal Kombat. He is vengeance encoded into biology, tragedy bound to sorcery, and fire weaponized as memory. Every kunai thrown, every hellfire unleashed is not just combat, it is the replay of the family's final scream, turned outward into flame. This is the real horror of his lore. He doesn't merely fight, he relives, and in reliving, he destroys. At first glance, Scorpion's spear doesn't look supernatural at all. It's nothing more than a kunai tied to a length of rope. Primitive next to Hellfire or teleportation. But in the hands of Hanzo Hasashi, it became one of the most feared weapons in Mortal Kombat history. Historically, the weapon echoes the Kyoketsu Shoge, a Japanese ninja tool with a blade on one end and a weighted rope or chain on the other. These weapons weren't designed for brute killing. They were built for control. With enough speed, the rope turns into a whip, the blade arcs through space, and suddenly, a warrior can strike from 10 to 15 feet away. Scorpion's version pushes that principle into nightmare territory. The moment the blade pierces, the rope transforms from a flexible tether into a lever of absolute dominance. Let's run the numbers. If Scorpion hurls his spear at 60 miles per hour, roughly the speed of a major league fastball, the small kunai, let's say 1 pound of steel, carries about 240 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. That's roughly the force of a heavyweight boxer's punch landing straight into flesh. Once embedded, the real punishment begins. When Scorpion yanks, the rope acts as a winch. If he exerts a pull with just 100 pounds of force, less than half the torque Olympic wrestlers generate in a clinch, the opponent isn't just dragged. They're yanked off balance at 10 to 20 feet per second squared, fast enough to cause whiplash, disorientation, and destabilization before the killing strike even lands. And remember, Scorpion is not just a man, he's a revenant. Mortal combatants might fatigue after a dozen pulls, but he doesn't burn lactic acid the way we do. His strength doesn't sag with exhaustion. That means every "get over here" is delivered with the same unrelenting precision fight after fight, corpse after corpse. The spear also has a second layer, fear. Before it even lands, its presence warps the fight. Opponents freeze because they know the consequences. Psychologically, anticipation of pain spikes cortisol in the bloodstream, slows reflexes by milliseconds, and creates hesitation. In combat sports, even a 200 millisecond delay can mean the difference between blocking and eating a strike. Scorpion exploits that pause ruthlessly. By the time the spear strikes, the victim's body is already compromised, not just by physics, but by fear. Lore raises the stakes even further. Sometimes the rope isn't just a rope, it's infused with hellfire. When that happens, physics is overshadowed by supernatural damage. In scientific terms, if the spear were carrying plasma heat at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, flesh wouldn't just cut, it would cauterize on entry, burning muscle and nerves as the victim is dragged forward. The pain is doubled, searing burn on the outside, tearing pull from within. That hybrid of precision weapon and infernal energy turns what looks primitive into something unstoppable. And then there's the catchphrase, "Get over here," isn't just a fan service, it's a verbal trigger of dominance. Pairing a command with unavoidable force converts the move into psychological warfare. You're not just being hit, you're being ordered into submission. Neuroscience tells us that humans react to commands with increased compliance under stress. Even for an instant, the mind stutters, treating the demand as authority. Scorpion weaponizes that instinct, making you a participant in your own defeat. That's why the spear endures. It's not a spectacle, it's inevitability. Fire and teleportation may defy physics, but the kunai on the rope is grounded in both real-world combat tradition and biomechanics. Scorpion's genius is taking a tool of control and magnifying it into something mythic. By the time you hear the chain whistle through the air, the fight is already over. You just haven't hit the ground yet. Imagine if grief could ignite, not metaphorically, literally. That's what Scorpion embodies. His resurrection didn't just give him a second life, it turned his loss into a weapon. Every time hellfire erupts, it isn't fuel and oxygen meeting, it's memory combusting. Sorrow burning so hot it becomes flame. In Mortal Kombat lore, hellfire doesn't behave like ordinary fire. Normal combustion is chemistry. Oxygen mixes with fuel. Heat excites molecules, and flames sustain at around 1500 to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. Enough to char flesh, melt lead, and reduce wood to ash. But Scorpion's hellfire is described as a supernatural blaze that torches not only bodies, but souls. Victims collapse even when their skin doesn't fully ignite, because the fire is bypassing biology. It's burning existence itself. But let's run the numbers as if it were real. To ignite human skin, you need at least 1100 degrees Fahrenheit of surface heat to cause third-degree burns deep enough to carbonize muscle, closer to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, a cremation chamber runs at 1600 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit and takes 2 to 3 hours to reduce a body to ash. Yet Scorpion can incinerate enemies in seconds. That suggests his flames carry the energy output of an industrial furnace compressed into a single burst. A propane torch produces about 2,000 BTUs per hour. To match Scorpion's ability to immolate a person in 10 seconds, Hellfire would have to unleash hundreds of thousands of BTUs instantly, the equivalent of setting off a small bomb, but with surgical precision. Now, here's the biological wall. Scorpion unleashes more energy in one strike of Hellfire than a human body metabolizes in an entire day. In Mortal Kombat X, the comics show that the stronger his grief, the stronger his flames. That means every time he summons Hellfire, he is ripping open the wound of his family's death, reliving the screams, the fire, the slaughter. He doesn't just burn his enemies, he burns himself, emotionally, again and again. In psychological terms, it's like PTSD weaponized. Trauma normally cripples survivors by looping them back into their worst memory. For Scorpion, that loop fuels his deadliest attack. Could we fake it with technology? Possibly. Imagine a combat suit wired to a soldier's biometrics. When adrenaline spikes, it triggers micro nozzles releasing high-pressure accelerants, igniting them with plasma arcs. The observer sees fire erupt as if fueled by anger. In engineering terms, it's doable. That's why Hellfire stays in the realm of the supernatural. It's not just energy, it's emotion weaponized beyond physics. It represents something biology can't do: transform heartbreak into combustion. For Scorpion, the flames are both curse and strength. They destroy his enemies, but they also bind him to a wound that will never heal. That's why his fire terrifies. It doesn't consume fuel, it consumes memory, and memory never runs out. Scorpion doesn't just fight with fire, he rewrites the battlefield itself. His teleportation, known in lore as the Hellport, is one of the most disorienting abilities in Mortal Kombat. One instant he's in front of you, the next he's materialized behind, a strike already driving into your spine. Unlike magic for spectacle's sake, the games explain this as passage through the Netherrealm. He vanishes into that infernal dimension and emerges wherever he wills. His movement isn't speed, it's shortcut. In gameplay, this flips the rhythm of combat. How much energy would it take to rip a hole through space and reappear across the arena? The answer: more than human civilization produces. Let's start with wormholes. According to general relativity, a traversable wormhole could link 2 points in space-time like a tunnel. Sounds like Scorpion's trick, right? Here's the problem. To keep a wormhole stable, you need negative energy, exotic matter, measured in magnitudes equal to the mass energy of entire stars. For example, physicists estimate that even a microscopic wormhole throat large enough for a proton will require 10 to the 30th joules of energy. By comparison, the entire global energy consumption in a year is only about 6 times 10 to the 20th joules. In other words, humanity's yearly output is a billionth of what Scorpion would need for a single micro-teleport. What about quantum tunneling? At the subatomic level, particles can teleport past barriers by probability alone, but the distances are microscopic, fractions of a nanometer. Scaling that to a 200-pound revenant body? Impossible. The odds of every atom tunneling together in sync without decoherence is so astronomically low that it might as well be zero. Even if we ignored physics and just thought about biology, teleportation would be catastrophic. A human body contains about 7 times 10 to the 27th power atoms. To disassemble and reassemble them instantly would require tracking and transmitting more data than the entire internet has ever processed. At minimum, about 10 to the 28th power kilobytes of information, far beyond what's computable. And any error, a single atom misplaced, could mean instant cellular collapse. Lore sidesteps this by binding Scorpion's teleportation to the Netherrealm. He's not transmitting matter. He's phasing into a dimension where pain and space are malleable. It's supernatural efficiency. Distance isn't crossed, it's erased. That's why he can appear behind you without violating physics, because he isn't obeying physics at all. And the psychological impact is just as devastating. Humans rely on predictive processing. Your brain predicts where someone will be based on visual cues, about 200 milliseconds ahead. Scorpion deletes that expectation. When he vanishes, your brain predicts forward, but he appears behind, nullifying your defense. That forced mismatch spikes cortisol, slows reaction, and leaves you wide open. In neuroscience terms, he's hacking your perception of space as much as your body. In lore, Scorpion doesn't just teleport himself. He summons legions of skeletal warriors, flaming skulls, and revenants, as if commanding the Netherrealm's fabric. From a science angle, that's necromancy. He isn't a fighter with tricks. He's a bridge to another reality. The verdict? Physics slams the door shut. Traversable wormholes require stellar-scale energy. Quantum tunneling is too small. And disassembly teleportation is computationally impossible. Scorpion can only exist because the Netherrealm allows grief to break the rules that no lab or reactor could ever bend. That's the genius of his design. Teleportation isn't an upgrade to his speed. It's proof that vengeance itself has no distance. Scorpion's powers exist because trauma, Quan Chi's manipulation, and infernal tethering combined into something no flesh could endure. So, which piece would you try to replicate? The kunai, the flames, or the space-bending illusion? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these Science Meets Mortal Kombat breakdowns, like and subscribe for more.